Some truths don't arrive in a moment of triumph. They don't reveal themselves in daylight or during grand events. They come quietly, like an old friend, knocking softly at a door when the world is asleep. Ronald Reagan had such a night when he finally faced the truth he had been avoiding since he was a child. A truth that shaped how he loved, how he forgave, and how he carried himself through the years that followed. It happened a long time before he became the man people knew. Before speeches, before stages, before cameras. Back when he was simply Ronnie, a boy from a small, Midwestern town who tried to keep his voice steady even when the world around him shook. He was 17 that year, tall, lanky, hopeful, but burdened with worries he tried to hide behind easy smiles. He was the kind of boy who held the family together without anyone noticing. When the bills stacked too high, he found odd jobs. When his mother grew tired, he helped her quietly. When his brother struggled with school, he stayed up late, tutoring him. And when his father came home after one too many drinks, stumbling and apologizing in the same breath, Ronnie was the one who gently guided him to bed, whispering that tomorrow would be better. But the truth, the one he never said aloud, was that he was exhausted. Exhausted from pretending he wasn't scared. Exhausted from believing it was his job to keep the family from falling apart. Exhausted from holding inside the fear that maybe love wasn't strong enough to change the people we need most. That winter had been harsh. Bitter winds rolled across the fields, rattling the old farmhouse where his family lived. Nights felt longer than usual, and the silence carried a weight Ronnie didn't know how to set down. One night, after a particularly difficult evening, one filled with raised voices, slammed doors, and his father's unsteady footsteps, Reagan stepped outside to breathe. The cold air hit him like a splash of icy water. He wrapped his jacket tighter around his body and walked toward the edge of the yard, his boots crunching over patches of frost. The sky was clear, filled with stars that seemed sharper than normal, as if the universe was watching him more closely than it usually did. The moon hung low above the barn, casting faint silver light across the fields. Reagan sat on the front porch steps, rubbing his hands together for warmth. He had spent his entire life being the steady one, the one who stayed calm even when the world spun wildly. But that night, he didn't feel steady. He felt breakable. Inside, he heard his mother's quiet footsteps, gentle, patient, tired. She whispered something he couldn't hear. Maybe a prayer, maybe a hope. She carried strength the way some people carry heavy buckets, with effort, but with grace. Reagan closed his eyes. The truth he had been avoiding for years hovered close, like a shadow leaning toward him, but he wasn't ready. Not yet. He stood and walked across the yard, toward the fence line that divided their property from the neighboring fields. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, dark soil, bare trees, and the faint glow of distant farmhouses. He stopped when he reached the old oak tree at the far end of the yard, the tree he climbed as a boy, the one he and his brother used as a fort when life felt simple. He rested his hand against its bark, feeling the roughness, the coldness, the age of it, and then he sat beneath it. The tree had always felt like a shelter, even when the world felt too big. Maybe because it didn't ask anything of him. Maybe because it didn't expect him to be brave. Maybe because it didn't care if he admitted he was tired. He drew his knees close to his chest and stared out into the empty fields. He didn't cry. He didn't have the energy to cry. He simply breathed, long, slow, heavy breaths. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time felt different that night. Then he heard footsteps, soft, careful, familiar. His mother. She approached quietly, carrying a blanket around her shoulders. She didn't sit immediately. She just stood beside him, studying his face the way mothers do when they already know the truth but want to hear it spoken. "Cold night," she said gently. Reagan nodded. "Yeah." She lowered herself beside him, wrapping half the blanket around his shoulders. They sat in silence for a long moment, sharing warmth, sharing breath, sharing heavness. Not finally, she spoke. "You're carrying too much again." Reagan's jaw clenched. "I'm fine." "No," she whispered softly. "You're pretending to be fine." Reagan looked away. "Someone has to keep things together." His mother smiled sadly. "Yes, but it doesn't always have to be you. He shook his head. If I don't do it, everything falls apart. Things fall apart sometimes, she said. That isn't your fault. He exhaled sharply, frustration building in his chest. I can't just sit and watch things go wrong. You're not watching, she said gently. You're holding, with everything you have. He didn't respond. His mother placed her hand over his. Ronnie, who takes care of you? He looked down. He didn't have an answer. He never had. His mother's eyes filled with something heavy, sorrow mixed with pride. You don't always have to be the strong one. Reagan whispered. If I'm not, who will be? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she rested her head lightly against his shoulder. You think strength means not breaking, she said softly, but sometimes the strongest thing you can do is tell yourself the truth. Reagan felt something tremble inside him. What truth? She looked up at him, eyes warm, eyes tired, eyes full of a lifetime of understanding. The truth that you're hurting, she said. The truth that you're afraid. The truth that you're not responsible for everything that goes wrong. And the truth that it's okay to need help. Reagan swallowed hard. A lump rose in his throat, one he had been pushing down for years. He shook his head slowly. If I admit that, I'll fall apart. His mother squeezed his hand. Then fall apart, she whispered. I'll be here. The words hit him like a quiet storm. Reagan opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Not at first. Not until he finally let go of the breath he'd been holding since childhood. I'm tired, he whispered. His mother nodded gently. I know. I'm scared I'll end up like him. I know. I don't know how to fix anything anymore. I know, sweetheart. Reagan pressed his forehead into his hands. I don't want to hate him, he whispered, but sometimes I do. His mother exhaled a soft, trembling breath. It's all right to feel that, she said. Feelings don't make you unkind. They make you human. Reagan shook his head, voice cracking. I'm supposed to be strong. You are, she whispered. But strength without truth breaks people. Reagan's shoulders finally slumped, not because he gave up, but because he stopped fighting himself. His mother placed her hand over his heart. Say it, she whispered. Just once. Say the truth you've been carrying. Reagan closed his eyes tight, and for the first time in his life, on that cold night, under the old oak tree, with frost on the ground and a sky full of stars, he said it. I'm scared, he whispered. I'm tired. I'm hurt. And I can't keep pretending everything is all right. He breathed in a sharp, painful breath, then let it out, slow, trembling, freeing. His mother pulled him gently against her, not the way a mother comforts a child, but the way the human beings hold each other when the truth finally breaks through. You told the truth tonight, she whispered, and that's the beginning of healing. Reagan didn't speak again. He didn't need to. He simply sat there, letting the weight slide off his chest. Not completely, but enough to breathe, enough to heal, enough to grow. He would remember that night for the rest of his life, the night he stopped pretending, the night he allowed himself to be human, the night he told himself the truth, a truth that shaped every quiet act of compassion he ever gave, a truth he carried into adulthood, into love, into leadership, a truth he never forgot. Because some nights don't just change a person, they reveal who they always were. The truth he whispered beneath that old oak tree did not fade with the sunrise. It stayed with him quietly, steadily weaving itself into the young man he was becoming. But the truth he spoke that night was only the beginning, only the first fragile layer of something deeper he wouldn't uncover until years later. That night opened a door he had kept locked since childhood, but walking through it would take much longer. In the days that followed, Reagan noticed small shifts within himself. He breathed a little deeper. He smiled less out of habit and more out of sincerity. He let himself feel tired without calling it weakness. And sometimes, when things became difficult, he stepped out to the old oak tree again, placing his hand on its trunk as if grounding himself in the memory of that night. But even as he carried that newfound softness, he still avoided one truth, the hardest one. The one he wasn't ready to face. The truth about his father, not the man everyone saw during the day. Charming, humorous, hopeful, but the man he feared at night, unpredictable, unsteady, slipping away in ways Reagan couldn't stop. He loved his father deeply, and he resented him deeply. Holding both at once exhausted him. And so, he pretended he didn't feel both. Years later, when Reagan was in college, he was sitting alone on a bench outside the library, watching the campus lights flicker in the late evening breeze. It was early autumn, the season that always brought him back to that night under the oak tree. He pulled his jacket tighter around himself as memories drifted back uninvited. He hadn't spoken to anyone about that night, not his friends, not his brother, not even his mother, after they moved to a smaller house. It was a memory he carried like a folded letter inside his chest. He took it out sometimes, quietly, to remind himself that he didn't have to pretend to be strong all the time. But one evening, as he stared at the walkway lit by soft orange lamps, he realized he had been carrying a question for years, a question he had avoided because the answer scared him. Why had he been so afraid of becoming like his father? He had seen men afraid of poverty, illness, failure, loneliness, but he had never met anyone so afraid of becoming their own parent. Until he looked at himself, he rested his elbows on his knees and stared at the ground. What exactly was he afraid of? Was it the drinking, the unpredictable anger, the broken promises that followed every apology? Or was it the possibility that the pain his father carried, a pain Reagan didn't understand, lived somewhere inside him too? He didn't know. What he did know was this: he loved his father deeply, and that love had shaped him in ways both beautiful and heartbreakingly painful. He wanted to forgive him, and he wanted to stop hurting because of him, but he couldn't do either without telling himself the truth he had buried for years, the truth that terrified him more than anything else. He whispered it into the empty night. I can't fix him. The words trembled as they left his mouth. I can't save him. His breath shook. His hands shook. His entire sense of identity wavered. I can't carry all of this anymore. Reagan pressed his palms against his face. Tears, warm, unexpected, slid down his cheeks. For so long, he had believed his father's pain was his responsibility, that if he tried harder, loved more, was better, quieter, stronger, he could keep his father from falling apart. But the truth was simple, and it hurt. His father's battles were not his to fight. He sat there in silence as the lamps flickered overhead. It felt like surrender, but a gentle one, the kind a tired heart needs. Later that year, Reagan went home for a weekend visit. His father was sitting on the porch, staring out at the yard with an expression that looked more lost than thoughtful. Reagan approached slowly and sat beside him. They didn't speak for a long time. The wind brushed fallen leaves across the ground. A dog barked in the distance. Someone 2 houses down was burning wood for the winter. Finally, his father sighed, rubbing his temples. Ronnie, he said, his voice shaky, you're a good boy, better than I deserve. Reagan swallowed hard. Dad, no. His father interrupted, lifting a hand. Just let me say this. Reagan waited. I haven't been the man I should have been, he whispered. Not for you, not for your brother, not for your mother. His voice cracked. I don't know how to be better. Reagan stared at him, really stared, and for the first time in his life, he didn't see a giant he was trying to measure up to or outrun. He saw a man, a flawed man, a hurting man, a human being. And the truth, the real truth, finally rose inside him with startling clarity. He couldn't save his father, but he could love him without carrying his burdens. He could care without losing himself. He could stay without holding his breath. So he placed a hand gently on his father's shoulder and said the words he had once needed someone to say to him. It's okay, Dad. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to try tomorrow. His father's face crumpled. He let out a shaking breath and nodded. They sat together quietly, 2 human beings trying, failing, forgiving. And that night, when Reagan returned to college, he finally understood why the truth mattered so much. Because when he told himself the truth, the real truth, he began to heal, not from his father, but from the weight he had carried, trying to be everything for everyone. Years later, when he spoke gently to strangers, when he forgave mistakes quickly, when he chose kindness even when the world was loud, it wasn't politics, it wasn't performance, it was survival. It was the boy under the oak tree learning how to breathe again. It was the young man outside the library admitting his limits. It was the son sitting on the porch beside a man who did his best and often fell short. It was a lifetime shaped by one quiet night of truth, and Reagan never forgot it. Decades later, Reagan told Nancy a softened version of that story. The oak tree, the porch, the truth, he whispered to the sky. He didn't tell her all of it. Some truths remained sacred, but she understood enough to place her hand over his and whisper, "You became who you are, because you learned how to be honest with yourself before anyone else." Reagan smiled faintly, not because the truth was easy, but because it had freed him. And from that night forward, whenever he felt the pressure of the world, whenever he worried he wasn't enough, whenever he feared becoming someone he wasn't proud of, he returned to that moment beneath the oak tree. The cold air, the starlit sky, and the soft voice inside him saying, "Tell yourself the truth, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts." If this story touched a quiet part of your heart, I'd be grateful if you left a comment, clicked the like button, and subscribed for more quiet memories. Your support keeps this storytelling alive for everyone who needs a gentle place to land.